Welcome to episode 115 of The Route presented by White Whale Marketing. The Route is a glorified sports business coffee chat that has a new guest every episode as they share their experiences and route in sports. I'm Christopher Nascimento, and as always, let's get started. Just a few things to cover before we get into today's guest. If you haven't already, you can see on the video, podcast, and hopefully on audio as well. You can see in our bio or on the video here, it shows our social media handle at The Route Sports. So check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, probably something else as well. But the point is, at The Route Sports is where you can find us. We have new clips coming out every day for the podcast. So that's something new that we've been doing, and it's been doing really well, allowing the podcast to grow further. So check us out there. Maybe you can find some little tidbits, or maybe even it's a little easier to connect with one of the guests that we have on once you have a little more knowledge or a little insight into them. So check us out on social media at The Route Sports. And if you're watching it on video as well, you can see just underneath at The Route Sports, you see the Apple, Spotify, Google, YouTube, and many more icons. So check us out on all platforms. We're available on video and audio. I believe we're up to 10, 11 platforms now. I think we added Amazon as well, Audibles. So check us out there. And please take the time to subscribe, follow, leave a like, leave a comment, all that good stuff. That engagement allows us to continue to grow. And then the bigger the podcast gets, the better it is for everyone involved, whether it's us, you, etc. That's all good stuff. Now, with that said, we can kind of get into the episode. Just before we have a little quick note.
Damn it, I lost another bet. I always do this. Why can't I win at least one?
Need an edge in sports betting?
BetStamp allows you to compare the best available odds among sports books. To get an edge in sports betting, download the BetStamp app and use the code WHALE to get access to all the affiliates and pricing. The only way to get an edge in online sports betting is by having accounts with multiple sports books.
Yes.
BetStamp.
I'd now like to welcome someone I've been fortunate to know since I was a student, and who is leading the charge in both the CHL and CFL in corporate partnerships, Vice President of Corporate Partnerships and Consumer Products at the Ottawa Sport Entertainment Group. Bennett, welcome to The Route. How's it going?
Good. What's going on, Chris? How are you today?
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks for joining me. I know I probably chatted to you before the podcast even started about the podcast and different ideas like that, so I'm glad I finally have you on for episode 115.
Yeah, man, I feel terrible. I feel like this has been literally 3 years in the making, 115 episodes in the making, man. I feel terrible that I'm only 115. We've tried to do this a few times.
Yeah. Well, it's good stuff. At least you're 115, and now it's a little more legit, right? Where it's not.
There we go.
Episode whatever.
No, I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to it.
Perfect. So you've seen the episodes, and you've listened to the podcast. The question I have for every guest is, take me through your route. So I know you went to school. So which school did you go to? How did you pick it? And how did we get to where we are today?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like my journey to where I am now is a prototypical sport management journey. I'm born and raised in Ottawa. 2 grade schools here. I had actually applied, was literally on my way to the guidance council office in high school with an application that had Carleton, U Ottawa, and Queens for all commerce degrees. Sat down on Spare with some buddies and just chatting, and somebody had a Brock, the old school. I'm old enough when your courses were looked like a Yellow Pages book to pick your courses, and was just kind of leafing through it, and honestly came across this sport management program at Brock, and literally spent the next half hour, 40 minutes diving into it. And before I got home that day, I'd scratched out. Won't name the school I scratched out, but scratched out one of those schools, put sport management at Brock, didn't tell my parents, didn't tell anybody, and submitted, and ended up getting into Brock. Was the only person from my high school that went, didn't know anybody. And as it turns out, that really set me on my path, or on my route to where I am. Going to Brock, taking that sport management program was easily the best decision, one of the best decisions I've made for my career. I enjoyed all of my time there, was involved in student politics, residence life, services. Worked at the campus bar for 4 years. That I think was my first foray into networking for that time there, and really started to build relationships that I still, people I went to school with, people I got to know, the professors, the guest speakers, really started to build up my circle of influence from those days. So did 4 years there. Going into my last year, I really had no idea, much like, I teach at Algonquin now part-time. And, I say this to the students there, like, it's okay to not know exactly what your path is. And I, at 23, 24, had no idea what I wanted to do. And I had run in in kind of the student union election. Going into that night, I thought I was going to win. Everybody you talked to that night, it's like, yeah, I voted for you. I was so confident, and ended up losing it to a short, by a short margin. And it was devastating. It was probably one of the lowest points for me, personally and in my journey. But again, I think when I look back, I wouldn't be here if I had won that election. I'd probably be on a different path, because what it caused me to do is I took a gap year, kept working down in Niagara, and really started to think about what is the next step that's going to set me up for what I want to do. I knew I still wanted to work in sport. I was considering law school, grad school, maybe even teachers college, to go down that road, and ended up choosing to do my master's. And I applied to a few schools, Ottawa, Western, Windsor, and ended up going down for a visit at the University of Windsor, and absolutely loved it. Probably the furthest school I could have picked from home growing up in Ottawa. But it was, what I really loved about that program. And still, I'm close with Jess Dixon, who, is leading that department now. And some of, we've been fortunate enough at OSEG to have some interns come through that master's program. It's a really small cohort, usually about 10 to 15 students. And it's you have to do an internship. So if you know that you want to work in the industry, it was a really great way to get your foot in the door. So after my gap year, went down to Windsor, moved down there for a year, really loved the coursework. Really, again, it was a small, intimate group. Loved the professors, loved the experience. And then in, kind of the back half of that, I started, like most students do, start freaking out about where you're going to do your internship and what that next step is. And was really fortunate to get connected to Randy Sexton, who, any hockey fan would know, especially in Ottawa, first GM of the Sens. Went forget where he went before he came back to Ottawa, but he ended up opening up the Bell Sensplex, and was the first GM there, and really, kind of state of the art 4-pad arena, which is now a staple in the hockey community here in Ottawa. And got connected with him. There was nothing posted from internship. It was just a connection I had made through my mom of all, like I've said this before, it's so cliche. My mom worked with Randy Sexton's wife at a hospital here in Ottawa. I got his email and then harassed him for 6 months. And finally he said, come on up next time you're home. Let's sit down and chat. And that was my interview. And, that would have been in May. And 2 months later, July of 2006, I started as an intern at the Bell Sensplex. Really, I don't think at that time I knew what I wanted to do in the industry. And because of that, because I couldn't specify or have clear objectives, I don't think they knew what to do with me as an intern. And so I think there was this bit of a dance for the first month or two, just trying to figure out where I fit in, where I could contribute. And then once we kind of found that niche, we were off and running. And my internship was 6 months long, ended up staying on full time, and they created a role for me, which was all centered around, they had just started a lot of their grassroots sports initiatives, their hockey initiatives. So summer camps, power skating, 4-on-4 leagues. And I was doing a little bit of everything. I was, marketing them, try and fill in every spot in there, was doing all the finance, was helping execute, the signups on event nights, things like that. And it really gave me an insight into kind of, different functions or elements of the sports industry, but also how much you had to work. And I think that's what I prided myself on and tried to do was, again, it's cliche, but I was the first one there every morning. I remember, I think after the first 10 days, I didn't have a key. So I would get there super early and literally work in the hallway. I'd plug in my laptop and start working. And finally, my boss was like, "We'll get you a key, so you don't have to work outside in the hallway." And then, yeah, it kind of took off from there. And I really enjoyed the grassroots element to that role and the community feel, and creating fans for life. And that's really the whole point of what the Sens have established with the Sensplex, is getting kids at Sparty learn to skate and have them as part of that funnel all the way through their hockey journey. And now I'm living it on the other side. My life's coming full circle for sure with my kids and my son and coaching and his involvement in minor hockey, which is great. And so from there, I stayed there for a couple of years, leading the group that ran all of the youth, youth hockey, youth programs. And then from there, moved over to the marketing department at the Sens, and really specifically into the community development group, working for Aaron Robinson, who's still there. I consider Aaron, one of my mentors and one of the leaders that really, in my career taught me, how important it is to do things right the first time, work hard. He might be still the hardest working guy in sport. I really enjoyed my time. My role was focused on mainly running the Bell Capital Cup hockey tournament. So back in the day, it was, upwards of 500 hockey teams from all over the world, China, Finland, Sweden, all over the US. So really putting all of those pieces together, working with the board here locally, making sure we're raising funds for the community through that tournament. And then leaning in on, anything that involved alumni, mascots, the red zone before playoffs, community events. That was our team that did that. So, when I look back, those first two roles, I mean, man, it was those were 60 to 80 hour weeks nonstop. And, for me, I think it really set the bar for, the level of effort and work it would take to get things done right. And so from there, I moved into a sales role, which, for me, to be quite honest, was I was scared. I had turned it down a couple times, wasn't really sure, wasn't confident in my ability to be a salesperson. I think, naively, at the time when I thought of sales, I think like most people who are unfamiliar with sales think about, the cheesy used car salesman, insert, movie clip here of kind of that, awkward salesperson. That's what I thought it was. And Chris Atack, who now, we're colleagues at OSEG, and he was leading the sales team at the time at the Sens, just said, listen, it's just about, monetizing the relationships that you already have. And you're somebody that has lots of relationships. And now it's leveraging those and nurturing those relationships, and ended up taking a swing at it. And, I would say within my first 2 months, maybe, realized this was, it kind of just unlocked something within me that I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my career, as far as business development, nurturing relationships, taking those relationships, and, leveraging them to drive value for our organization, and in turn creating value for those, for those fans, for those businesses that were coming to Sens games at the time through tickets. So did that for a couple of years, like most salespeople, kind of worked my way up, and, was handed some of the, casual buyer list, which anybody in sales knows that's an abyss. That's a dark rabbit hole that you have to go down and cut your teeth on. But kind of worked my way from selling casual, group tickets and things like that into season tickets, and then really elevated into premium seating, and started to kind of cut my teeth on local regional advertising. I really liked it. And when you think of, when I think of my time at the Sens, I had to, we were riding high, things were going really well. And then we had the lockout in 2012 lockout. And, we had 24 people in the sales pit, some really great people, really successful people, hardworking people. But of those 24, they were up front and said, we're only keeping 8. And, I was lucky that I was one of the 8 that got to stay. But my daughter was, I think, a year old at the time. I had, all of these stresses and came to the realization that I wasn't going to be able to stay at the Sens. So I needed to find another gig, and ended up, going to and working for a client of mine, slinging Keurig machines and coffee to downtown businesses. And what I realized, great company, really great people. I think I was probably, working half the hours and making way more money than I was at the time. And the, first month was awesome. Second month got a little worse, and gradually after that, I just felt like I wasn't doing what I loved, and that was absolutely, it killed, kind of what I wanted to get out of my career and what I was passionate about, and that for me was a challenge.
So 2012, lockout came. Sales leadership came to us and said, "Hey, good news is, we get to keep 80 of you. Bad news is we only get to keep 80 of you." And as a young person at the time, my daughter was 1. Tons of, I'm staring down the barrel of, looking at a comp plan that, relied on selling tickets and making commission, and didn't have anything to sell. So made the tough decision to leave, and it broke my heart. I grew up in Ottawa, diehard Sens fan, loved, just professionally had grown so much in that organization, but had to make the move for me, my family. And it started off great. Was working way less hours, no evenings and weekends, was making some more money at that time in my career. And my decision was driven by money. And it was a good lesson to learn at that point in my career, that you can't make decisions based on money. And again, I think I'm throwing out every cliche in the business here. But it's true. It honestly was true, and I lived it. And every day I woke up, after a couple months, I dreaded going in. It didn't fire me up, and it wasn't. Had great people, great leadership, great business model, room for growth in that company. Like, it's not like I landed in a bad spot, but for me, it was a really tough spot for me to wake up every day, because I didn't feel it wasn't what I wanted to do. And so fast forward, a few more months down the line, strike's over, lockout's over, everybody's going back. And, I think on day 2, Chris Atack and I connected again, and he knew exactly why I was calling. And, within a week, maybe a week and a half, I had an offer, had to jump through a couple of hoops. It wasn't, and rightfully so, right? Once you leave there, you leave, and had to sit down with C-suite there, and kind of communicate to them why I wanted to come back. I was dedicated and wanted to be part of that team, and ended up coming back for a few more years, and moved into a sales leadership position, and continued to drive revenue and create opportunities for myself and for the organization, and really, really enjoyed my time there. And then again, by kind of like happenstance, ended up going to Algonquin College career panel that, I now solicit my friends to come on and join, and was chatting there, and Adrian Sierra was an executive at OSEG, who, again, we kind of had, similar roles in terms of, business development, and he was new to the city, and I didn't really know him at all, and reached out to him and said, "Hey, we're going to be on this panel together. Do you want to grab coffee afterwards?" And so, a half hour, 45-minute coffee turned into about an hour and a half conversation, and halfway through, he was telling me how they're posting for a director of corporate partnerships role. And at that time, this would have been back in May of 2015. So, Red Black OSEG had just kind of reestablished themselves. Lansdowne had just been finished. You had the Fury, you had the 67s, you had the Red Blacks. At that time, like, OSEG knew they were going to be hosting the Grey Cup in 2017, but it wasn't public knowledge. So the opportunity, when I looked at, where I was at the Sens, I knew at that point I wanted to be in sponsorship, corporate partnerships, and the Sens were loaded. They had I think, some of the best corporate sellers, business developers in the industry. And there was no room for me, and I couldn't see a runway where I could get there. And so that, coupled with the really great opportunity, to take a step up in my career, and to work for somebody like Adrian and Bernie Ash and Mark Gowdy and the execs that were there at the time, plus the multiple brands. That for me, and people always ask me and I think in our, everything is about lists, right? Everything in our life is about lists and rankings, and I think I had people around me that were like, wait a minute, you're leaving, for Steve Value of an NHL team here to go to a CFL team here. And I think that's a huge misconception in our industry. And I say this, to students and those that ask if I'm on panels. It's about the opportunity and about the people you work with and the room for growth and how does it connect to your passion points. And I think OSEG checked the box at the time and still does for me. On a lot of those things. And so made the really tough decision to resign from my role. That was a big 3 months in my life. Family bought a new house in May, resigned from the Sens in June or July. My son was born mid-August and then started at OSEG just after Labor Day, man. So every time that kind of, my son just turned 7. So every time that happens, I just it's a lot has happened in that time. And that 3 months was, for sure a transcendent moment in my life, both personally and professionally, and set me on this course at OSEG and over, since September of 2015, I've been on the partnerships group at OSEG and really started off, in a pure sales role, trying to bring in new partners, new categories, drive value for them. And I think the first 6 months were really hard. And I've said this to others, I always wondered, was Bernie and Adrian and Mark walking by my office, what is Bennett even doing in there? Because I think it took me 6 months to actually put a win on the board. And that can be hard. That was for me, going from, a transactional relationship on the ticketing side where you're closing deals every single day to more of a strategic decision-making, arena or ecosystem where, sales cycle on a partnership could be anywhere from 3 months on the short side to, we've put deals together in the last couple, in the last year at OSEG that we've been chasing for 2 years. So that for me was a huge learning curve. But I think once I settled in, I had, great people around me, great mentors around me, trust, from the leadership group. And it's almost like, a hitter that's going through or, goal scorer that's going through a slump. And once you get one, then you're off and running. And that, that for me, I think, that summed up kind of my, my experience there and was off and running and had tons of success early on. Grey Cup was right around the corner. We won a Grey Cup in 2016, which is still, one of the coolest moments in my career, being in Toronto. That game is one of the best Grey Cup games of all time. And then just seeing, especially people that, had come before me and worked in the industry way longer than I had finally get a ring and all of their hard work. That was cool to see. And then just being a part of it and planning there's a few cobwebs from a late night celebration the night before, and you're on the phone trying to organize a championship parade that doesn't come along very often, and that's something I'll never forget for me in my career. And then and then we come back and we're already in planning for 2017 and being able to host that event and working with so many incredible colleagues on putting that together for CFL fans across the country. That is and was one of the coolest opportunities in my career, and just solidified my decision to move over to OSEG and go down this path in corporate partnerships. And since then my roles continue to evolve, and I think through kind of 2017, 2018, 2019 started to take on more with some changes and restructuring within our group. I ended up moving into a sales leadership role, and then ended up taking on the servicing arm and account fulfillment arm of our group. And then that I thought was on a really great trajectory and excited about what was to come. And then, like everybody else, March 13th 2020 was fresh off of a great family vacay down in Mexico, and life's looking good, and you're hearing about rumblings of kind of this variant out in Asia, and then like most sports fans, was at home. Kids were in bed, was doing some email, watching basketball or that night, and the game gets the NBA game gets canceled, Twitter's blowing up. The next day, Mark Gowdy, our CEO, calls an all staff meeting in the arena and essentially says, and his leadership through that entire process was unbelievable. But he was honest. I don't know what the future holds, but we all can't be here and send everybody home. And so, like everybody, you're kind of panicked and worried, and that entire process and going through COVID, like everybody, it's we are, at the best of times, sport's a nice to have, not a need to have, for on a micro level for businesses and season tickets and sponsorship. But even in the grand scheme of things, right, like from a macro level, we are for sure a unifier. We bring communities together, we bring people together, we're entertainment. But I think going through the last couple of years with COVID, you realize you're just a nice to have, and so that put a lot of stress on from personally, as somebody who's trying to provide into a family budget, and you're dealing with online school and all the other family stuff that people with kids were dealing with at the time. But then you've got people on people on my team looking at me for answers. I'm looking at our leadership team for answers, and nobody has them, and it's nobody's fault. You just, every day it became, we're just chewing things off every day at a time. And very quickly, when we realized this was likely going to be for the long haul, we huddled as a partnerships group and said, okay, let's assume the worst, and let's assume there's going to be no seasons this year. There's no games. How do we still drive value for our clients during this time, in the absence of games? And that for us became the North Star. How do we drive value for our clients and do right by our clients? And I think, when I look back at somebody asked me the other day on a panel, like, what's the thing you're most proud of? And, my answer is for sure changed in the last couple of years when I look back. And I think you asked me that now, and it is for sure the way that, being a part of that team, that corporate partnerships team, that group at OSEG that still kept pushing forward and was driving value for partners during that time. And, even despite the absence of games, we came up with this Our Nation Corporate Heroes program. And so, immediately, kind of those April, May, June, we're on the phone with every single partner, explaining kind of where we're going, trying to figure out, what's the best way to move forward with each partner. But then in reality, selling them on this program that kept them relevant within our fan base, within our sandbox, and, through social, digital content, signage down around Lansdowne, in the absence of games. And we're so blessed. I think, at OSEG, we've been, my time, we've been so blessed by great partners that just get it. And it's really easy. Everybody's your friend when you're going to 3 Grey Cups in 4 years, and then you're hosting a Grey Cup, and that everything's going well, and everybody's your friend. And I think, as I'm sure and others know, it's when times are the toughest that you find out who your true friends are. And I think that's the same in business. And I think what going through 2020 and 2021 taught us is that we have a lot of friends at OSEG and a lot of great partners. TD, TELUS, KPMG, Labatt, Gabriel Pizza, like these unbelievable, blue chip brands, blue chip partners. They were so empathetic. They're going through their own challenges, right? In every different industry, right on down to, some of our local partners and, the Access Storages of the world and, Leuna, like there's so many. I now I'm going to get in trouble for not naming all the other partners in our stable. But in all seriousness, like, a lot of those partners could have just said, hey, listen, like, we're not paying, we're not, we're walking away, just, talk to us in 2 years when this thing's over. And I think over an 18-month span, I think we lost 2 partners. And more based on strategy out of, 150 partners that we have, and it was based solely on strategy, not on relationship or not on COVID. It was just, hey, we're making a pivot. We were going to make a pivot anyways in our strategy, and now's the time. So you can't fault a partner for that. And so that was a really tough grind. Lots of we did a major, it was in the news, did a major restructuring at OSEG, lost some great colleagues and friends that we had grinded through Grey Cup and other things with. I think in 21, it was like, it was 2 steps forward, 3 steps back on in everybody's lives, professionally, just with some games had restrictions, shortened schedules. I mean, the NHL tried to do their best, piping in, EA Sports soundbite stop tracks to replicate, sounds and crowd noise. We had 7 home games instead of 9 on the Red Black side of things with 50% capacity restrictions. And I think of those 7 games, I think 6 were torrential downpours, but that's for another part.
I remember
of nature. But and then the 67s, and man, like, you talk about, going back to that, afternoon on March 13th and, how heartbroken we felt as staffers going home. That 67s team, watching Marco Rossi play last night against the Sens, like Rossi, Quinn, Ball, Felleber was part of that group the year before. Like, that team was on, we think, they were on pace to, best team in the country, over 50 wins, perennial, NHLers on that team. We were poised for a big run to the Mem Cup in Kelowna. That was heartbreaking for those guys. It's not like, staffers, we could come back and our jobs were there. These kids age out. And so, I wasn't in that room, but to hear some of the, from James Boyd and Andre Tournier, the conversation they'd had with that group, like, that's heartbreaking stuff. And so, to go from that, low is an understatement, and to kind of see the resiliency of OSEG and, our ownership group, our leadership group, everybody right down to coordinators, some people furloughed, some people coming back. Like, it was an uncertain time. And I think, even, January of this year, right? Like, everybody, after you got to have a Grey Cup in December of 21, everybody had a good holidays, and then you're ready to come back and kind of crush. We had our business plan set for 22. Everybody's, excited. Here we go. And then we spent the month of January at home again because of restrictions. And I think that, that again was one of those real valleys where, and everybody's looking to each other for answers and to pick up. And I think, again, it speaks to the resiliency of the group we have at OSEG. And, we were able to get through that. And then, I think we're kind of, bit of an up and down year for us on the field, but business wise, we're pushing forward, and it's been really great. And so, all of that, has been a lot, talk about my route and path, and now my role's changed. I've added, consumer products to the mix, which now is, all of our retail operations, our licensing, that entire arm, which is new for me and a new part of our business to learn, which has been really great. I'm really lucky to have, an all-star team on that side of our business. And then, recently, it was elevated into a VP role, at OSEG in the spring, and now, part of a new group, a new team with our exec group, and learning my way and trying to find my spot and find where I add value, which is a whole other, study on human psychology and organizational behavior, but it's been great. It really has been great. And I'm excited for what's to come, here at OSEG, and lots of great things on the horizon. Even this weekend, our friends at Athletico, they're pushing towards 14,000 people for the CPL final. Blackjacks just hosted, the CEBL championships. Lots of exciting stuff going on at OSEG, and I'm just happy, and to be honest, quite fortunate to be a part of it, and look forward to being in it for the long haul.
Yeah, no, that's
a lot
awesome.
of talking, man. Like, and I remember when Nick was on here, he kept saying the same thing throughout.
Yeah,
it's a lot of one way talking, man.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You're telling your storytelling. You're sharing your story, and that's perfect, right? Where I already have, one page of notes before I ask the second question. But that's the beautiful thing where now I can just go fill in the gaps with the details, right? Where you did such a good job providing that. And I'm sure as you've seen, I want to go back to the beginning a bit and then we'll kind of work to where we are now. But you were talking about at the beginning where you're going through that Yellow Pages book, right? To kind of figure out what you're going to do for school.
Yeah.
And that kind of brought back memories to myself where I'm also from Ottawa. I was set. I was going to go to Montreal for school. Then my mom brought me to Costco one weekend. I saw the price of chicken. I was like, that's not happening. And then, crazy amount of chicken breasts back in the day. But I did the same thing. I applied to Ottawa, Carleton, etc. Essentially, my mind did all the safe programs. I'll get a job after school, accounting, finance, and I don't know, something with law at Carleton and something with whatever else in business. And then I always had an interest in sports. That was always my passion. And my whole objective when I went through accounting was at 40, I'd have hopefully a good chunk of money and I'd have a financial advisement agency just for sports. That was the plan. I'd still do the accounting, all that safe stuff.
Yeah.
And then I would talk about this with professors, different things like that when I was in CEGEP. And they're like, no. They're like, you're good at business. Don't go do sports. That's a hobby. Leave that for the weekend. So then that deteriorated my thought process where, fine, I'll just do accounting and enjoy sports on the weekend. But then what you're sharing, in your experience, you had that little moment where you had that fork in the road, like, no, actually, I'm going to go chase the passion, where I had mine a little later. How was that? Because I'm sure there's either people listening or people that are kind of going through that right now. What gave you the, let's say, confidence to be like, you know what, I'm actually going to go chase this instead? Because you're probably 18 and that's a pretty big decision.
Yeah, it's, a great question. And I wish I had a scientific answer for you. And I think in that moment, and I think everybody can look back and, I had the same feeling when I was faced with the decision, to resign from the Sens and go to OSEG. It's a gut feeling. And it just felt like you almost feel compelled, like you have to do this and you have to make this decision. And it's at the time inexplicable. Like it was hard to describe. I just felt like I had to do it. And I think with that, once everybody kind of realized I had applied, then it's like, you gotta deal with the outside noise. Right. And it's, I think everybody, and I'm old enough where, 20 years ago, 22 years ago, it was, you had to go to university, never mind college. You had to go to a 4-year degree. You had to take business. You had to do this, this, and this. I think that has changed for sure. But answering, going to Thanksgiving and trying to justify to your uncles or your family, like sport management, what is that? You're going to be a gym teacher? Like what, like no disrespect to my gym teacher friends. Like they've got it made, let's be honest. But like to your point, like it was just, you, I think, have to be confident in that decision. When you make those kind of that fork in the road, you got to own it and you got to go all the way down the path. Because if you don't, then you're in that purgatory, right? Where you're kind of dipping your toe in or you're 1 foot in. You got to own that decision. And I look back over my career so far, and I'm sure I'll be faced with more of these decisions, throughout, and in life sometimes too. And sometimes your gut is the best indicator. And, I think it's also your circle of influence, right? Like on that decision when I was 17, 18, I think I was too nervous to even tell my parents at that time, I had a girlfriend, high school, girlfriend definitely didn't want to tell her because she was going to Carleton. Like it was really hard. But I think, I look at those other big decisions, like, leaving the Sens, like I have a circle of influence that I trust, right? First call was to my dad, talking to my partner, my wife, like, and then I've got a couple like really good buddies who will tell me, and I'll do the same for them. Like, we'll tell each other when we think we're making a bad decision, or give you that devil's advocate, that honest answer. And I think between my gut and my circle of influence, that's how those decisions, I think, for anybody, if you're lucky enough to have that really good circle, those are really great people to help I don't know, rationalize your decision or validate your decision is probably the better way of saying it.
No, that, like, even just the way you're answering that, it just makes me like think back to maybe some of my experiences where when I finally decided to go into sports, or specifically marketing, my parents were away on a trip. I was 19. I was home alone. I had my accounting job, and they offered me like, hey, when you're done school, we want to keep you full time. And to my parents, with immigrants, my grandparents were like, hey, you won the lottery, government full-time job in accounting.
Right.
And as soon as they asked me that, the next day I quit. I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I changed programs. I went straight into marketing, and I started developing my personal brand because I thought I was behind. And same type of thing where they're all questioning me, like, hey, why would you go into, like, why are you trying to chase sports marketing, like accounting? They're like, you're going to get paid, you'll have your house in no time, etc.
Yeah.
And then same thing happened when I was with Atletico, and then they're like, okay, I guess you're proving yourself. This is the right path for you. When I did that other gut feeling, I was like, no, I think I have to do this white whale marketing stuff now. And I definitely feel that where you're at Thanksgiving, different things like that, where I definitely had a few holidays of questions where
for
like,
sure.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
But no, that makes a lot of sense where it's just something, and you have to go after it. And then just kind of building on that as well, right? You're talking about, you had that gut feeling. That's what made you decide to go to Brock and go through the sport management program. And then while you're talking about the school experiences, you're saying how you kind of really dived into the environment of what it is to, be a sport management student, being a student as a whole, and leveraging that.
Yep.
And then on that note, you're touching on the student election. And I wanted to hear about that because you're like, hey, like it changed my path. So what was going to happen if you won?
You're opening up an old wound, man. Come on, I tried to blow by that. So here's the irony. Here's what I didn't say about it. So the woman who ran and won, I didn't know all that well at the time. Brock was relatively a small school, but fast forward, she married one of my best friends, and is literally like I was in their wedding. It became one of the jokes of the wedding, and she did such a great job in that role and propelled her in her career, and she's got, she's has a successful path all on her own. But for me, I think, to be honest, when I look back, it was some low hanging fruit in my eyes to stay in that university, comfort zone. Right. And we've all been there. Right. It might be, for me, it was Brock and university and just the friendships I had made there, the life I'd built for myself there. For others, it might be, in a role that, they probably know they should leave, but it's their comfort zone. And for me, when I say it probably would have altered my path, like if I would have won that election, stayed at Brock another year, I don't know if I would have after that gone to grad school or pushed myself out of that comfort zone, because I would have had one more year of solidifying just, what I was used to, and really just, almost doubling down inside of that comfort zone. And I think, what it, at 24, I almost call it was kind of like the quarter life crisis, right? Like it was, okay, now what? Now, school's done. You got to be an adult. Like how do you take that next step? And I think that for a lot of people that's the cliff. We were just talking, we were at an event the other night and with, one of the Red Blacks players, and he was saying, like, on that cliff, we were talking about just, their season. And, when you're on that cliff, that's where you grow. And that really stood out to me. We were just having this conversation over beers the other night. But when I think about, your question, like, yeah, I was standing on that cliff and now I don't know what, but that's where you grow. And it was like, okay, I sulked and, was my own worst enemy for 3-4 days. And then I shrugged it off. Now I need to go find a job if I want to stay down in Niagara for a year. Worked for a year and then, gave myself kind of a timeline, said, okay, in 2 months, you need to start figuring out what the next step was. And that for me was grad school and kind of got me back on that path. But I wouldn't, and again, I wouldn't change and that path or taking that year or losing that election. Like that, to me, that's the cliff. That's the good stuff, where you learn about yourself and makes you more resilient for the next time you're on that cliff.
For sure. It seems like every question I'm asking, you're just bringing up my old wounds now. Where like you're talking about how when you're 24, I just turned 25, and so I was 24 like when in the spring and the winter, and that's when we were chatting the other day. I was telling my parents were like, "Hey, hobby, business, like time to figure it out, big boy." Like exactly, I was about the point there. They're like, "Time to figure it out," and I was like, "Oh, you know what? Like I have been a little reckless. I'm like, let me go do some interviews." And when I was doing those interviews, my parents were all happy. They're like, finally, he's going to play it a little more safe because he's been risking different elements of his life already. And then after those interviews, I was like, nope, I'm going back. I'm like, I have to give it a few more months because I can't live most of myself if I didn't. So then kind of went back on that. I definitely agree with what you're saying there. And then kind of building on what you were saying, you went through that experience. And the other day when we were chatting, like, hey, like I kind of had that typical A to B route. But then you're saying you took that gap year, right? And that's something that's kind of daunting, right? Whether it's dealing with your parents and being like, hey, I don't know what I'm going to do for the next little year. Hey, like, I don't even know what I'm going to do for the next little bit. It's different. And then when you're saying how you're, you never know who you know, right? And that's how you kind of came about with Randy Sexton through your mom. Funny enough. Kind of pushing that envelope and seeing what's possible. And you were just touching on how you had your hands in a little bit of everything. And I think that's such a great example of you never really know, right? Where whether it's in school, I feel like you always have a mindset of, hey, I'm going to do brand marketing, right? I remember when I first met you, and even like Chris Atack, when you mentioned him as well. I think I met both of you, and ticketing, partnerships, and I was like, oh, these guys are nice to know, but I want to work in marketing. Or so I was like, whatever, that's it. But then once you start, touching different things and getting the experiences, that's when it really starts to shape you a bit more. So I think that's cool. And then when you're speaking to your class about maybe experiences like this, are there any types of things in 2022 that you would recommend for people to do to kind of get their hands involved in a little bit of everything? Because it's a little harder now, maybe.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think when I'm talking to students and, how they can position themselves for success and breaking in, right? That's what everybody wants to know. Like, how do I break in? And to me, it's trying a little bit of everything, not saying no to any opportunity. You have to get out of your comfort zone, and you have to put yourself in a position, and it's likely a volunteer position, right? Like there are always organizations. I just look at, at Lansdowne alone, we are always taking on interns or even just volunteers, Athletico, Blackjacks, 67s, Red Blacks. Look at, in a city like Ottawa, you've got two prominent universities with how many varsity teams. They don't have you just take Carleton and U Ottawa alone. They don't have the budget to hire full-time people, even part-time people for a lot of their roles. So it's students, it's people that want to try to, want to see what working in sports is all about. There's so many opportunities. And I think, I think, and that coupled with the power of LinkedIn, I would argue, and again, I'm old. The fact that you said you just turned 24 freaks me out, but I didn't have LinkedIn, right? Like people that I graduate with, we actually had to pick up the phone, use our parents to make those connections. Like, students that are in my class this year, and yourself, and even for me to connect with people that I'm looking to connect with, in my role. You're one click away. And I've said to students, you're one click away. If you're into brand marketing, you're one click away from every sports CMO in the world. Real Madrid, Barca, Atletico, Queensland, Aussie rules. Like anybody you want to talk to, you're a click away. It's about, how you differentiate yourself in that initial connect. How do you add value to that person you're connecting with? But I think that tool coupled with an open mindset on getting out of your comfort zone and trying anything and not saying no to anything, those two things, I think the people that embrace those two things are the ones that set themselves up for success, and no shocker when I see them doing well and evolving throughout their career in sport.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great piece of advice, where that's how I kind of got my start in sport, where, what sports team wouldn't take someone on for free, right? Where I was like, hey, I'll 100% for free. And then I kind of built my way up through there. But no, that definitely makes sense, where, I've had people reach out to me about the podcast. They're like, hey, like, how did you meet this person? I was like, I just shot them a message. My dad used to always say, squeaky wheel gets the oil. So I asked people to come on, and, it's kind of been a great way to meet with people. And then before we wrap things up, just a couple of things to cover. Kind of skipping over the sense thing, but when you decided, hey, like, this is what I need to do for the rest of my life, that's a hard decision, right? Where you're saying, bought a house, kid, wife. What, like, because I've spoken to people, right, where at the beginning it seems like there's a lot of 20, maybe early 30-year-olds within sports like, hey, I'm chasing my dream. And then there's always, let's say, this this drop where once they hit a certain age, they're like, hey, maybe I have to get, serious, right? I got to pay the mortgage, a wedding, etc. What gave you that confidence and to be like, you know what, it's not about the money? I know you're saying that quote about like money shouldn't be making that decision, but what like push you like, you know what, I'm gonna go chase this dream?
Yeah, I think, when you're faced with and in sport, let me start with that. Like in sport, the money will come, right? Especially if you're working on the biz dev side. If you're putting in the work, and I think that's one of the myths, right? People say, "Oh, you're not going to make any money working in sport." Like you can, but it's usually on the revenue side of things. If that's what you're into, for me, I think when I was like, "Oh yeah, I am all in," it was really, after that initial conversation with Adrian, after meeting, Bernie Ash and Mark Gowdy, and they kind of got me excited about going to work at OSEG through that interview process. But then it was, man, like I started September. I was only 2 months in with 2nd and 25 Burris Ellingson. That was 2 months into my job, right? Then you're going to, whirlwind. Then we're unexpectedly going to Winnipeg Grey Cup. I think that as a sports fan, and that's what, my initial passion about working in sports, because I'm a huge fan of just sport in general. And so that emotional connection right off the top, 2 months into that role, that coupled with a fundamental belief in what we were doing as an organization and the people, like I look at kind of that to me is like the holy trinity, right? Connects your passion point, belief in organizational values, through kind of your ownership and your C-suite. And then you're in the trenches with people that you'd go through a wall for. If you can, like for me, it was just that was the holy trinity. It was the perfect storm. And I've literally ridden that wave for 7.5 years. And I knew, throughout, and don't get me wrong, it's not sunshine and lollipops all the time, right? It's ebbs and flows, and you go through things as devastating as COVID, or on a micro level, right? Like, you lose deals you thought you had, you're dealing with, conflict or, problem solving with partners. Like it's not all sunshine lollipops, but underneath it all, if that, as I say, kind of that holy trinity still exists, you keep coming back to that, it helps drive you through the times that aren't as fun or more challenging. So I think that's still my, kind of that North Star and what I'm working towards in my role. And it keeps me going. So I think that for me, making that decision back then, I feel the same way about OSEG as a whole and where I'm going with my career there.
Yeah, that's so funny because, I've met with you and spoken for a while now. And the thing you're saying about money will come, I say that all the time. Like, I'm still young. I'm like, money will come, whether it's investments, the business. I'm like, it will come. I know it will come. And that's why I don't really make that decision, where sometimes I'm even speaking with friends. I'm like, if you had $1 million, $100 million, I'm like, what would you do right now? I'm not saying that that's how you should make every life decision, but I think it kind of narrows some things down of, hey, like this is what I'm actually passionate about, or this is what kind of aligns with me well. So I definitely relate to that.
And you're always going to want to make more, right? You're
exactly.
always going to want to make, right? I look back at, and I'm going through it with people that, work on my team or colleagues or friends or, family, where it's, you get to certain, in your mind, milestones, right? I need to make this amount, or when I make this amount, I'm going to be way happier. Or when I get to make this amount, I'm going to be way happier. And what you realize is when you get to that amount, you look at the next level as that level where you're going to be happiest. And that's a real slippery slope, right? Like that's hard. You gotta embrace where you're at, and not lose your sense of hard work and passion and all of those sort of things. Because that is what's gonna keep propelling you there. But if your sole focus is happiness tied to money, it's I think you'll realize when you get to those milestones, it's not what it's all cracked up to be.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And before I kind of get into the final two questions, you're just kind of touching on some various things, especially relating to COVID, right? And I think that's super relevant, where you're talking about March 13, you're talking about that story, watching the NBA game and kind of realize, hey, like everything's closing.
Yeah.
I will never forget. I think it was March 12th, or it was that Friday in Toronto. And they're like, hey, meetings. I had interviews. Like I just finished graduating. I was going to go meet with the Argos, the Marlies, different things like that. So that was crazy on its own. And the two final questions I ask everyone here is just, you kind of touched on it. If you're able to kind of go back or speak to your class as a whole, what's like one piece of advice that you've now learned that you're like, hey, like this is something I wish that a younger Matt would know?
Man, I think two things. One, and I've said this to everybody when asked, like you can't get away from hard work. You just can't. Like you can't get away. And it's cliche, but I don't know if it resonates with everybody the same way. Like you literally can't get anywhere without working everybody around you. There's you can't teach that either. That's something I think you're born with. And it's your ability to just push. And you can see the people, right? That whether it's, training for a marathon or an Ironman or in their career or at home, and the way they, the way they keep their house, like you have to, work hard, and you can't fake that. So that to me is just recognizing that and recognizing the work it's going to take to get into the industry and then be successful in the industry and then get that, that next job, expanded role, all of that. And then, what I say to a lot of students is there's a big difference between being interested and committed. Right. And I know a lot of people talk about this stuff, but, to me, a lot of people are interested in working in sport. A lot of people are interested in, hosting clients at a Grey Cup or, all of the fun stuff that comes with working in sport. But very few people are committed to doing all of the little things that it takes to get to be successful in their role. You need to work long hours. You need to be well read on, if you're in business development and, you're going to, 3 to 4 networking events a month or a week, like it's hard. You need to be so well read in so many varying topics. Just look at Ottawa as a whole, right? Like what's going, election this past week, you need to be able to speak to that. You need to be able to speak to, the housing situation in Ottawa, the, political climate, what's going on in our industry. Like, you need to be committed to getting better every day. And I think I think that number of people who are committed is a fraction of those that are interested. And I think the ones that, we see at OSEG that come through, whether it's through interns or, people that are successful, they're committed. They're committed to making the organization better. They're committed to sacrificing, maybe their personal goals for organizational goals, or, committed to being a good teammate. And that, those are all things that, really aren't taught. There's no course, right? There's no course in a sport management program. It's just, you see it through everybody's life experiences. But when you have that secret sauce, you find those people that are willing to work hard, and stop at nothing to work hard and are committed to getting better, a little better every day, making their teammates better in their organization. Those are the high performers. Those are the, those are the unicorns that usually do well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And the last question I like to ask everyone, obviously we went in the past, now we're going to the future with the rocking chair. You're 103, you're on your rocking chair. I know you touched on some cool stories, but what's one thing that sticks out that you'll be like, wow, like I can't believe I got to experience that?
Yeah, I think, so far in my career, I think it was, I would say winning the Grey Cup, but to me, it was just that whole whirlwind experience, like that almost like 4 to 5 day experience and watching how it affected others, I think maybe is the best way to say it. Like, again, like, mentors that I had within OSEG who had been grinding, 10 years before I got in the industry. They've been in the industry for, at that time, 20 years and are now just getting their first, team ring and all, knowing all the effort and just the resiliency and the grind they've had to go through to get to that spot, and seeing just like, how happy they were to see some of the players, same thing, right? Like see players that have grinded through, and especially in the CFL, right? Guys that have taken, you talk about the route, like man, you could almost do a whole subsection of, of athletes on this podcast, right? Because it's not a straight line journey for a lot of these guys. So to see them, then to see the way the city embraced us, during that parade and just being in that crowd and, and then just how, again, what goes unsung are the people, the coordinators, the interns, the volunteers, what it took to put on, and how hard people work on just a regular Thursday night Red Blacks game, or, this weekend at OSEG, we're going to have 4 events in 3 days, and the people that get no love, and no recognition, but they're working harder than anybody kind of in, in the bowels of a stadium or an arena, seeing them get to celebrate, that to me, when I look back, like that's the good stuff, for sure. And there's been, man, like there's been some pretty cool moments, even at the Sens, some pretty cool playoff series, and, Tourist scoring in overtime against the Rangers. Like there's been some cool stuff, but I think just, what that Grey Cup meant to so many different people, at OSEG at that time, the city, that was for sure, that'll stand out, to me, wherever I'd go in my career.
Yeah, Matt, like that's a perfect way to end the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on, and I'm glad after 114 you're the 150th.
That's it, man. Yeah, sorry it took so long to put this together, man. It's been a long time coming, man, and I'm just so happy and proud to see your evolution and your growth with White Whale and this podcast. And yeah, man, you're one of those committed people we talk about, man. It'll be I'm looking forward to see where this takes you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that a lot. And
Awesome.
yeah, thank you so much. And we'll
Cool,
chat
man.
soon.
Okay. See you, bud.